Now let's begin. The Tuesday afternoon sun filtered through the windows of Timothy Knight's architectural firm when his phone buzzed with an alert that would shatter his world. The notification from Devin's Fitbit flashed red across his screen. Heart rate critical, 187 BPM. Location, 847 Meadowbrook Lane. His grandfather's house. Timothy's coffee mug hit the floor, ceramic exploding across blueprints he'd been reviewing. His hands shook as he dialed 911, his voice steady despite the terror clawing at his chest. My 9-year-old son, Devin Knight, his heart rate monitor is showing critical levels. 847 Meadowbrook Lane. I think something's happened. He didn't wait for questions. He grabbed his keys and ran. The drive from downtown Portland to the suburbs normally took 40 minutes. Timothy made it in 23, his Audi pushing 120 miles per hour on the interstate, weaving through traffic like a man possessed. Every second felt like an eternity. Devin's face flashed through his mind, his gap-toothed smile, the way he pushed his glasses up when he was concentrating, the Star Wars pajamas he'd insisted on wearing to breakfast that morning. Please be okay. Please be okay. Please be okay. Timothy had dropped Devin off at his grandfather Gary's house that morning, like he did every Tuesday. Gary Bauer had insisted on maintaining a relationship with his grandson after Cheryl's death 2 years ago. Timothy's late wife had been Gary's only child, and the old man seemed genuinely devoted to Devin. It's important for the boy to know his mother's side of the family, Gary had said with what seemed like sincere emotion. The suburban street came into view, and Timothy's blood turned to ice. 3 ambulances, 4 police cars, and what looked like an unmarked detective's vehicle lined the curb. Neighbors stood on their lawns, hands over their mouths, some crying. Yellow crime scene tape already cordoned off the property. Timothy abandoned his car in the middle of the street and ran toward the house. A uniformed officer stepped in front of him, hand raised. Sir, you can't. That's my son, Devin Knight. Where is he? The officer's face shifted from stern to something worse. Pity. Mr. Knight? Detective Valdez needs to speak with you. Sir, please, you need to prepare yourself. Where is Devin? Timothy's voice cracked. He tried to push past, but 2 more officers appeared. A man in his 50s approached, shield clipped to his belt. His weathered face carried the weight of 30 years on the force. Mr. Knight, I'm Detective Dwight Valdez. Your son is alive. Timothy's knees nearly buckled. Where? He's being transported to Providence Medical Center. Sedated, but stable. Mr. Knight. Valdez's jaw tightened. You shouldn't go inside. You can't see what we found. What the hell happened? Valdez glanced at the house, then back at Timothy. The detective's eyes were hard, but Timothy saw something else there too. Disgust. Raw, barely contained disgust. We found your son locked in a soundproofed room in the basement. A room that, Mr. Knight, we found cameras, recording equipment, files going back years. The world tilted. Timothy grabbed the detective's arm to steady himself. What are you saying? Your son was drugged. He's showing signs of prolonged psychological trauma. We found. Valdez pulled out a notebook, his hand trembling slightly. We found documentation. Photos. Videos. Mr. Knight, your father-in-law has been running some kind of collection operation. We're still processing the scene, but what we've found so far indicates this has been going on for at least a decade. Where is he? Where's Gary? Gone. Fled before we arrived. We have an APB out, but... Valdez stepped closer, lowering his voice. Mr. Knight, we found evidence linking him to at least 4 other children in the area over the past 15 years. This wasn't just about your son. He's been doing this for years, and he wasn't working alone. Timothy's vision blurred. Not from tears, those would come later. From rage so pure and consuming that it felt like fire in his veins. Not alone. We found communication logs. Encrypted files we're working to crack. Mr. Knight, I need you to go to the hospital. Be with your son. We'll need to interview you both, but right now. I want to see it. Sir, I strongly advise. Show me. Valdez studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Follow me. But Mr. Knight, you won't be able to unsee this. The house looked normal from the outside. Gary had always kept it neat. White colonial with blue shutters, a manicured lawn, a welcome mat at the front door. Timothy had been inside dozens of times. Family dinners after Cheryl died. Holidays. Birthday parties for Devin. How had he never known? They descended into the basement. At first, it looked like any suburban rec room. Old furniture, boxes of Christmas decorations, a dusty pool table. Then Valdez led him to what appeared to be a utility closet. Inside, hidden behind a false wall, was a steel door with an electronic lock. The door stood open. Beyond it was a nightmare. The room was perhaps 12 by 12 feet, soundproofed with acoustic panels on every surface. A hospital bed sat in one corner, restraints still attached to the rails. Cameras on tripods pointed at different angles. A computer setup with multiple monitors covered one wall, screens displaying what looked like streaming software. Filing cabinets stood along another wall, their drawers pulled open by investigators. But what made Timothy's stomach turn was the wall of photographs. Dozens of children's faces, some smiling, some terrified, some blank with trauma. And there, in the bottom right corner, was Devin, in a photo Timothy had never seen, wearing clothes he didn't recognize. How long? Timothy's voice sounded distant to his own ears. We're not sure yet. Based on the earliest dates we've found, possibly since he was 6. 3 years. 3 goddamn years of Tuesday afternoons. A forensic tech emerged from another room. There was another room, carrying a laptop sealed in an evidence bag. Detective, we found the client list. It's Jesus, Valdez, it's extensive. International. Timothy felt something break inside him, something fundamental. The world he'd known, the world where he was a successful architect, a good father, a man who followed rules and believed in justice. That world was gone. In its place was something darker, sharper, more focused. Mr. Knight, Valdez said carefully, watching Timothy's face. I know what you're feeling right now, but you need to let us handle this. We'll find Gary Bauer. We'll find everyone involved. The system. The system. Timothy laughed, a sound like breaking glass. The system that let this happen for years. The system that had neighbors, teachers, family friends who never noticed. That system. Sir. Timothy turned and walked out. He had to see Devin. Had to be there when his son woke up. But as he climbed the basement stairs, past evidence markers and crime scene photographers, past the life he'd thought was safe and normal, one thought burned in his mind with crystalline clarity. Gary Bauer would pay. They all would. And Timothy would make absolutely certain that when justice came for them, it would be delivered by his hand. Providence Medical Center's pediatric ward smelled like antiseptic and quiet desperation. Timothy sat in a chair beside Devin's bed, his son's small hand engulfed in his own. The boy had been sedated for the trauma, the doctors said. Better to let him rest. Let his body process the drugs Gary had given him. Let his mind retreat from whatever horrors he'd endured. Devin looked so small in the hospital bed, his face pale against the white pillows, dark circles under his closed eyes. And 4 drip-fed fluids into his arm. Monitors beeped steadily, tracking vitals that were finally stable. Timothy hadn't slept, hadn't eaten, hadn't left this chair in 18 hours. Detective Valdez appeared in the doorway at 7 a.m., 2 cups of coffee in his hands. He offered one to Timothy, who took it mechanically. They find him? Timothy asked. No, but we will. Valdez pulled up another chair. We've made progress on the case, though. The encrypted files. Mr. Knight, your father-in-law was part of a network. A sophisticated one. We're talking about multiple perpetrators, organized distribution, international buyers. Timothy's grip tightened on the coffee cup. Names. I can't share details of an ongoing investigation. Names, Dwight. Timothy's voice was flat, emotionless. He'd moved past rage into something colder. You know I'm not going to sit here and wait for the justice system to maybe, possibly, eventually do something. Valdez was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was low. Officially, I'm telling you to stay away from this case. Officially, any interference could jeopardize the prosecution. And unofficially, the detective pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket and set it on the bedside table. Unofficially, I've been a cop for 32 years. I've got a daughter myself. And I've seen too many cases like this fall apart because someone's lawyer was better funded than justice. He stood. That's a list of people we're investigating in connection with Gary Bauer. It fell out of my notebook. Clumsy of me. Timothy unfolded the paper after Valdez left. For names were written in the detective's neat handwriting. Gary Bauer, primary suspect, fugitive Ralph McCarthy, business partner, current whereabouts unknown Clarence Ferguson, encrypted communications found Everett Goldstein, financial transactions linked. Below the names were addresses, known associates, and what looked like personal details Valdez had no business sharing with a civilian. A nurse entered to check Devon's vitals. She was young, maybe late 20s, with kind eyes that kept darting to Timothy with obvious sympathy. "He should wake up in the next few hours," she said softly. "The psychiatrist will be by this afternoon." "Thank you." Timothy's voice sounded like a stranger's. After she left, he stared at the list again. For names. For men who had participated in destroying children's lives, in creating a market for horror, in turning innocence into commodity. The rage he'd felt yesterday had crystallized into something precise. Timothy Knight was an architect. He built things, designed them from foundation to rooftop, considered every angle, every stress point, every possible failure. He'd spent 20 years creating structures that would stand for generations. Now he would apply that same meticulous attention to destruction. His phone buzzed. A text from his business partner, Henry Burns. "Tim, just heard about Devon. Whatever you need. Office is covered. Take all the time you need." Timothy typed back, "Thanks. Might need to take a leave of absence. Few weeks minimum." He had sick days saved. Vacation time accrued. And more importantly, he had resources. Money from his successful firm. Connections throughout Portland's business community. Knowledge of how systems worked and, more importantly, how they failed. But first, he needed information. Timothy opened his laptop and began to research. Gary Bauer's life started to unfold across his screen. Public records, property holdings, business registrations. The old man had retired 5 years ago from Bauer McCarthy Construction, a mid-sized commercial development firm. Ralph McCarthy, his business partner, had taken over day-to-day operations. Interesting. Timothy dug deeper. Bauer McCarthy had projects throughout the Pacific Northwest, warehouses, storage facilities, commercial properties. The company owned a dozen buildings outright, others through subsidiary LLCs. He cross-referenced addresses with the properties Valdez had listed. 3 of them matched warehouse locations owned by Bauer McCarthy. Not a coincidence. Clarence Ferguson appeared in business filings as the company's longtime accountant. Everett Goldstein was listed as legal counsel. All 3 men, McCarthy, Ferguson, Goldstein, had been working together for over 20 years. Timothy created a spreadsheet, something he'd always done when approaching complex projects. Columns for names, addresses, known associates, assets, vulnerabilities. Rows for each target. He populated it methodically, his architect's mind organizing chaos into structure. They'd built a network, used legitimate business infrastructure to facilitate their crimes. Warehouses that should have held construction materials instead held rooms like the one in Gary's basement. Money that should have flowed through normal business channels instead bought silence, paid off witnesses, funded their depravity. They'd been smart, professional, careful, but they'd made one critical mistake. They'd touched Timothy Knight's son. Devon stirred in the bed, a small sound escaping his lips. Timothy immediately set aside the laptop and took his son's hand again. "Dad, I'm here, buddy. I'm right here." Devon's eyes fluttered open, unfocused and confused. Where am I?" "You're in the hospital. You're safe now. Grandpa can't hurt you anymore." The boy's face crumpled, and he started to cry. Deep, broken sobs that shook his small frame. Timothy climbed onto the hospital bed, careful of the 4 lines, and held his son. He made soothing sounds, stroked Devon's hair, promised over and over that he was safe, that it was over, that no one would hurt him again. But inside, Timothy was making different promises. Promises written in blood and fury. When Devon finally cried himself back to sleep, Timothy returned to his laptop. He had work to do. The psychiatric evaluation took 3 days. 3 days of specialists asking Devon gentle questions while Timothy watched through one-way glass, his hands clenched into fists. 3 days of his son describing things no child should know, recounting experiences that would scar him forever, whispering about Grandpa's special room, and the other men who visited, and the camera games. Dr. Caroline Kane, the child psychologist assigned to the case, pulled Timothy aside on the 4th day. She was in her early 40s, professionally composed, but Timothy could see the strain around her eyes. "Your son is remarkably resilient," she said. "With therapy, with support, he can recover from this. But Mr. Knight, I need you to understand, this will be a long process. Years, probably. And there will be setbacks. I'll be there for all of it. I know you will. But I'm also concerned about you. Caroline studied him carefully. You're showing signs of acute trauma yourself. What you discovered, what you're processing. I'm fine. You're not fine. And that's understandable. Have you considered speaking with someone yourself? The Victims Services Coordinator can recommend. I appreciate the concern, Dr. Kane. But right now, my focus is on Devin. She handed him a card anyway. When you're ready. And Mr. Knight? Whatever you're thinking about doing, and I see it in your eyes, I've worked with enough trauma survivors to recognize that look. Please consider that Devin needs his father. Not a father in prison. Timothy took the card. I'll keep that in mind. That evening, after Devin was discharged into Timothy's custody with a prescription for anti-anxiety medication and twice-weekly therapy sessions, they went home to Timothy's downtown loft. He'd moved here after Cheryl died, unable to stay in their family house with its memories. Now he was grateful for the security building, the doorman, the cameras in the lobby. He'd already installed additional locks on his door. Tomorrow he'd hire a security consultant to upgrade the whole system. Devin was quiet on the drive home, staring out the window. Timothy didn't push him to talk. The therapist said to let him process at his own pace, to create a safe environment where he felt in control. After a simple dinner, mac and cheese, Devin's favorite, though he barely touched it, Timothy set his son up in the guest bedroom that he'd already converted into a proper kid's room. Star Wars posters on the walls, Lego sets on shelves, a PlayStation Timothy had bought 3 months ago for custody weekends. Dad, Devin's voice was small. Are you going to find Grandpa? Timothy sat on the edge of the bed. The police are looking for him. But are you? Timothy looked at his son, this 9-year-old boy who'd survived horrors, who'd been betrayed by family, who somehow still had the clarity to ask the question that mattered. He could lie. Should lie, probably. Tell his son to let the authorities handle it, that justice would prevail through proper channels, that violence and vengeance weren't the answer. But Devin deserved honesty. Yes, Timothy said quietly. I'm going to find him, and I'm going to make sure he never hurts anyone again. Devin nodded, some tension leaving his small shoulders. Good. After Devin fell asleep, fitfully, whimpering occasionally before settling, Timothy returned to his laptop at the kitchen table. He'd spent the past 72 hours building a profile on each target while sitting in hospital waiting rooms. Gary Bauer, 68. Widower. Retired construction executive. Former Marine. No criminal record. Pillar of the community. Volunteer at his church. Everything about his public life was a carefully constructed lie. Current location, unknown. But Timothy had theories. Ralph McCarthy, 66. Bauer's business partner for 30 years. Divorced twice. One adult daughter, estranged. Lived in a penthouse downtown. Drove a Mercedes. Still actively running Bauer McCarthy Construction. Clarence Ferguson, 62. Accountant. Married. 3 grown children. Lived in the suburbs. Coached Little League. Every neighbor interviewed described him as friendly and helpful. The banality of evil, Timothy thought. Everett Goldstein, 59. Attorney. Specialized in real estate law. Partner at a mid-sized firm. Collected art. Donated to children's charities with remarkable irony. All 4 men were connected through business. But Valdez's evidence suggested something deeper, a coordinated network, with Gary at its center, that had operated for at least 15 years without detection. Timothy opened a secure folder on his laptop. Inside were files he'd acquired through less than legal means. He'd paid a private investigator named Jerry Weiss, a former cop who'd left the force under murky circumstances, $5,000 for detailed background checks that went beyond public records. The files revealed patterns. Property purchases that didn't make business sense unless you understood their real purpose. Financial transfers between shell companies. Encrypted communication logs that Weiss's tech specialist had partially cracked. And photos. God, the photos. Weiss had warned him, but Timothy had looked anyway. Needed to look, to fully understand what he was dealing with. Now he wished he hadn't. But he also needed the rage those images fueled. Needed it to stay focused, to not lose his nerve. His phone rang. Detective Valdez. We've got movement, the detective said without preamble. Someone accessed one of Bauer's storage units in Gresham an hour ago. Security footage shows Ralph McCarthy. You bringing him in? Can't yet. Don't have enough for an arrest warrant, and his lawyers would have him out in hours anyway. But we're watching him. seeing where he leads us. Where was the storage unit? A pause. Mr. Knight, I can't share operational details. Dwight, you already gave me their names. You know what I'm doing. Either help me or tell me to stop, but don't play games. Another pause, longer this time. Then, Unit 247 at Secure Store Gresham. But Tim, if you do something stupid, I won't get caught. He hung up before Valdez could respond. Timothy pulled up property records for Secure Store Gresham. The facility had 300 units. Without knowing which one Bauer owned, the rentals would be under corporate names. He'd need a different approach. He called Jerry Weiss. I need surveillance on Ralph McCarthy. 24 hours. I want to know everywhere he goes, everyone he meets, every property he visits. That's expensive, Mr. Knight. We're talking round-the-clock personnel, multiple vehicles. Name your price. $15,000 for the first week. Done. Start tomorrow morning. And Jerry? I need this discreet. If McCarthy suspects he's being followed, I've been doing this for 20 years. He won't know. After hanging up, Timothy checked on Devin again. Still asleep, though his face was troubled even in rest. Timothy gently brushed hair off his son's forehead, careful not to wake him. I'm going to fix this, he whispered. I promise. He returned to the kitchen and opened a new document on his laptop. At the top, he typed, Operational Plan. Below that, he began to write. Architects created blueprints, detailed plans that accounted for every element, every contingency, every possible failure point. What Timothy was designing now wasn't a building, but the systematic dismantling of 4 men's lives. He would be methodical, patient, precise, and he would show them exactly what happened when you destroyed a father's world. The plan began to take shape. It was elegant in its way, cruel, yes, and illegal, absolutely, but with a certain architectural beauty to its structure. Each action would build on the previous one, creating pressure, forcing mistakes, collapsing their carefully constructed network from the inside out. By the time dawn light filtered through his loft windows, Timothy had filled 12 pages with notes, diagrams, contingencies. He was exhausted but clear-headed, focused. He'd spent his career building things. Now he would prove equally skilled at tearing them down. Timothy made coffee and watched the sunrise over Portland. Somewhere out there, Gary Bauer was hiding. Ralph McCarthy was sleeping in his penthouse, probably unworried, confident in his lawyers and his money and his years of getting away with horror. Ferguson and Goldstein were likely in their suburban homes, tucking their own children into bed without a trace of irony. They thought they were safe, thought they'd covered their tracks, thought that even if Gary got caught, they'd insulated themselves enough to avoid consequences. They were wrong. Timothy Knight had always been good at seeing problems others missed, at identifying structural weaknesses, at understanding how systems could fail. For 20 years, he'd used those skills to create. Now he'd use them to destroy. He pulled out his phone and started making calls. He had resources to mobilize, people to hire, groundwork to lay. The first phase would start today. Gary Bauer and his associates had spent years building their network, convinced they were untouchable. Timothy would show them just how fragile their structure really was. Jerry Weiss called 2 days later with his first report. McCarthy's predictable. Drives to the office every morning at 7:30. Lunch at the same Italian place downtown 3 times a week. Hits a gym in the Pearl District on Tuesdays and Thursdays. What about after hours? That's where it gets interesting. Last night he drove out to Gresham, circled the Secure Store facility twice, but didn't go in. Then he met with Clarence Ferguson at a coffee shop in Beaverton. They talked for 40 minutes. Both looked stressed. They're panicking. Probably. With Bauer in the wind and cops sniffing around, they're trying to figure out how exposed they are. Weiss paused. Tim, I've been doing this a long time. These guys, they're careful. Whatever evidence the cops have, it might not be enough to make charges stick on McCarthy and the others. Especially if Bauer stays disappeared. That's what I'm counting on. Timothy had already moved to phase 2 of his plan. He'd incorporated a shell company under the name Cascade Development LLC. The incorporation papers listed a registered agent in Delaware, corporate address at a mail forwarding service, and a purpose so generic it could mean anything: real estate investment and property management. Using Cascade Development as a front, Timothy had Jerry Weiss's tech specialist, a woman named Kayla Williams who asked no questions and charged premium rates, create a comprehensive dossier on Bauer McCarthy construction. Financial records, property holdings, ongoing projects, client lists, everything. What Kayla found was damning. Bauer McCarthy's legitimate business was declining, losing contracts, bleeding money, surviving on credit. But their subsidiary LLCs showed unusual cash flows, properties that generated no apparent rental income, and financial transactions that made no business sense, unless you understood what those properties and transactions actually supported. Timothy sat in his downtown office, door locked, studying the financial forensics spread across his desk. Devin was at school, his first day back, with a therapist on call and special accommodations. Every instinct had screamed at Timothy to keep his son home, to homeschool him, to wrap him in protection until the world was safe again. But Dr. Kane had been firm. Devin needed normalcy, needed routine, needed to reclaim his life rather than hide from it. So Timothy had driven him to school that morning, walked him to his classroom, met with the principal and counselor, and made it absolutely clear that his son was to be released only to him or to pre-approved individuals on a list. He'd even hired a security consultant, Doug Wright, former Secret Service, to conduct a threat assessment of the school. "You're being paranoid," the principal had said gently. "My son was imprisoned and assaulted for 3 years by someone I trusted." Timothy had replied, his voice flat. Paranoia is the appropriate response. Now, with Devin safely at school and Timothy's calendar cleared for the week, he could focus on the work at hand. He pulled up a map of Bauer McCarthy's properties. 12 warehouses, 8 commercial buildings, 3 storage facilities. Most clustered in industrial areas, Gresham, Hillsborough, Oregon City. Areas where strange vehicles and irregular hours wouldn't draw attention. Timothy had already driven past 6 of them. From the outside, they looked legitimate. Chain-link fences, basic security, occasional evidence of commercial activity. But he'd noted camera placements, access points, traffic patterns. One warehouse in particular had drawn his attention. A facility in Oregon City registered to a subsidiary called Meadowbrook Holdings LLC. The corporate filing listed Gary Bauer as managing member, but the registered agent was Everett Goldstein's law firm. Meadowbrook, like the street where Gary's house stood. Timothy pulled up satellite imagery of the warehouse. It was isolated, surrounded by other industrial buildings, with a single access road. The building itself was perhaps 20,000 square feet, metal construction, roll-up bay doors on one side, a personnel entrance on the other. He needed to know what was inside. Breaking in was risky. Security cameras, alarms, potential witnesses. If he got caught, it would destroy any chance of legal action and probably land him in prison, leaving Devin without a father. But Timothy wasn't planning to break in himself. He called Kayla Williams. "I need building permits and inspection records for a property in Oregon City. Address." He gave her the Meadowbrook Holdings warehouse address. "Give me an hour." 45 minutes later, his email pinged. Kayla had pulled permits going back 10 years. The warehouse had been substantially renovated 5 years ago. New HVAC systems, electrical upgrades, interior modifications. The permits listed the contractor as Bauer McCarthy Construction. Of course. But what caught Timothy's eye was a permit filed 2 years ago for soundproofing installation for media production facility. The contractor listed was an outfit called Silent Room Solutions. Timothy researched Silent Room Solutions. Small company, specialized in acoustic treatment for recording studios, home theaters, podcasting rooms, and soundproof cells for predators. He felt his jaw tighten. The pieces were falling into place. Gary and his network hadn't just used existing infrastructure. They'd systematically built it, using legitimate business permits and contractors to create their hunting grounds. His phone rang. "Detective Valdez." "We found something," the detective said. "Bauer's credit card was used at a gas station in Reno, Nevada, 2 days ago. We're coordinating with Nevada authorities." "You think he's still in Reno?" "Doubtful. Guy's smart enough to know we can trace credit cards. But we're checking security footage, talking to anyone who might have seen him." Valdez paused. "How's Devin doing?" "First day back at school today. He's managing." "Good. That's good. Listen, Tim, off the record, we're building a case against McCarthy and the others, but it's slow going. Lawyers are circling, evidence is getting challenged, and without Bauer to testify about the network's operations. You need more evidence. What we need is for these guys to make a mistake, but they're lawyered up and staying quiet. Honestly, Our best shot is if one of them gets nervous and tries to destroy evidence. If we catch them in the act, we can move faster. Timothy smiled without humor. What if I could help with that? Mr. Knight. Hypothetically, if someone were to, say, apply pressure to this network, make them panic, cause them to do something rash, would that be useful? A long silence. Then, hypothetically, if someone did that, it would need to be done very carefully. Any hint of entrapment or illegal action would poison the entire case. Understood. And Tim? Also hypothetically, be careful. These are dangerous men with a lot to lose. If they suspect someone's coming after them outside official channels, they might respond aggressively. I'm counting on it. After hanging up, Timothy reviewed his operational plan again. Phase 3 was about to begin. He'd spent weeks gathering information, understanding his targets, mapping their vulnerabilities. Now it was time to start applying pressure. Ralph McCarthy would be first. Timothy pulled up the surveillance photos Jerry Weiss had provided. McCarthy at his gym, at his office, at his apartment building. The man moved through his life with the confidence of someone who'd never faced real consequences. Even with Gary Bauer in the wind and a police investigation underway, McCarthy maintained his routine, trusting his lawyers to handle any problems. That confidence would be his downfall. Timothy opened a new email account, one Kayla had set up through a VPN and multiple privacy layers. He attached several files, financial records showing questionable transactions between Bauer McCarthy and its subsidiaries, property records for the warehouses, and photographs of the soundproofed room in Gary's basement that Valdez had accidentally left in his notes. The subject line read, "Your business partner's secret." The recipient list included McCarthy's ex-wives, his estranged daughter, business partners outside the conspiracy, and several journalists who covered white-collar crime in Portland. Timothy reviewed the email one more time, then deleted 3/4 of it. Too much information would be suspicious. Instead, he kept it simple. Ralph McCarthy's business partner Gary Bauer is wanted in connection with multiple counts of child exploitation. Records suggest McCarthy had knowledge of activities conducted at Bauer McCarthy Properties. See attached. Short. Direct. Damning. He scheduled it to send in 6 hours, giving him time to set up the next phase. Because McCarthy wouldn't just receive an email. He'd receive a systematic dismantling of everything he'd built. Timothy left his office and drove to a storage facility across town, one he'd rented under his shell company. Inside the unit were supplies he'd been accumulating. Cameras, recording equipment, hacking tools Kayla had provided, and several items that were definitely illegal. He loaded everything into his car, then drove to McCarthy's Pearl District gym. The facility had overnight security, but their cameras had blind spots. Timothy had cased the location twice. He parked in a nearby garage and walked to the gym carrying a small duffel bag. The locker room was in the basement, accessible through a side entrance that was rarely monitored. Timothy slipped inside during the evening rush, when dozens of members were coming and going. He located McCarthy's locker, number 237, assigned parking space matched the number, and installed a small camera inside the ventilation grate above it. The camera was connected to a cellular transmitter. It would send photos whenever motion was detected. Why? Because Timothy knew something the police didn't. Jerry Weiss's surveillance had noted that McCarthy stopped at his gym locker after every workout, but he never carried a gym bag in or out, which meant he was using it as a drop site for something. Probably communications with the network. Disposable phones, encrypted messages, instructions. The kind of thing you'd want to keep away from your home and office. Timothy finished installing the camera and left the same way he'd entered. The whole operation took 12 minutes. Back in his car, he checked the camera feed on his phone. Perfect angle. Now he just had to wait for McCarthy to make his next move, which, if Timothy's understanding of human psychology was correct, would happen very soon after that email blast landed. He drove home to find Devin sitting at the kitchen table doing homework, a babysitter named Margie Hutchins, a retired teacher Timothy had thoroughly vetted, sitting nearby with a book. "Hey buddy, how was school?" Devin shrugged, not looking up from his math worksheet. "Okay, I guess. Just okay. Some kids were asking questions about why I was gone. Miss Hutchins said I didn't have to answer if I didn't want to." Timothy shot the babysitter a grateful look. "That's right. You never have to talk about it if you don't want to." "But Dad." Devin finally looked up, his eyes serious behind his glasses. I think I want to. Talk about it, I mean. Dr. Kane says keeping secrets is what made it worse. Grandpa always said it had to be secret. Timothy pulled out a chair and sat down. Then talk about it. Whatever you're comfortable sharing. I'm listening. And so Devin talked, haltingly at first, then with increasing confidence, about the other children he'd seen in Grandpa's special room. About the men who visited. About the things they said and did. Timothy listened, his hands clenched under the table where Devin couldn't see, his face carefully neutral even as rage and grief tore through him. He listened because his son needed to speak, needed to reclaim his story, needed to know he'd be heard and believed. When Devin finished, Timothy pulled him into a hug. Thank you for trusting me with that. You're incredibly brave. Are you going to tell the police? Every word. It'll help them build their case. But inside, Timothy was thinking about Ralph McCarthy's locker, about the email set to deploy in 4 hours, about the camera feeds and financial records, and the carefully constructed trap that was about to spring. The police would build their case through legal channels. Timothy would build something else entirely. That night, after Devin went to bed, Timothy sat in his home office monitoring multiple screens. The camera in McCarthy's locker showed nothing yet. The email was scheduled to send at midnight. Jerry Weiss's surveillance team was positioned outside McCarthy's apartment building. Timothy's phone showed a text from Dr. Kane. Devin's session tomorrow is at 3 p.m. I'd like to speak with you afterward about his progress. He typed back, I'll be there. Another text, this one from Kayla Williams, got into McCarthy's home network. You want access? Timothy's fingers hesitated over the keyboard. Hacking into someone's home network was illegal, would taint any evidence found, could destroy the legitimate investigation. But it would also tell him exactly what McCarthy was hiding. He typed, yes. Send credentials. 30 seconds later, his laptop pinged with an encrypted file containing network access details. Timothy opened it and found himself looking at McCarthy's home security system. For cameras, living room, bedroom, front door, garage. All connected to the internet. All accessible. Timothy navigated through the system until he found stored footage. McCarthy lived alone, so the cameras captured his private moments. Phone calls, late-night computer sessions, visits from associates. Timothy found footage from 2 nights ago. McCarthy pacing his living room on the phone, clearly agitated. Timothy couldn't hear the audio. The security cameras didn't record sound, but McCarthy's body language screamed stress. Then, at 11:47 p.m., a visitor arrived. Clarence Ferguson, the accountant. The 2 men sat in McCarthy's living room for nearly an hour, both looking worried. At one point, Ferguson pulled out a laptop and showed McCarthy something on the screen. Timothy watched their expressions shift from worried to terrified. They knew the investigation was closing in. They were trying to figure out how to protect themselves. Perfect. At midnight, Timothy's scheduled email deployed. He watched the digital delivery confirmations pop up. McCarthy's ex-wives, his daughter, business associates, journalists, all received the message simultaneously. Phase 3 had begun. Now he just had to wait for McCarthy to panic. The response came faster than Timothy anticipated. At 2:17 a.m., motion sensors in McCarthy's locker triggered the hidden camera. Timothy's phone buzzed with an alert. He pulled up the feed. McCarthy, dressed in sweatpants and a hoodie despite the gym being closed, was using a key to access his locker. He pulled out a burner phone, typed frantically, then replaced it and left. 10 minutes later, Jerry Weiss called. McCarthy just left his building in a hurry, driving like he's being followed. Where do you want us? Stay on him. I want to know where he goes. Timothy tracked McCarthy's route through the GPS tracker Kayla had planted on his Mercedes 2 days ago. The car headed east, out of downtown, toward Gresham, toward the storage facility where Valdez had spotted him before. Timothy grabbed his keys. I'm following. Bad idea, Mr. Knight. If McCarthy spots you, he won't. I'm 20 minutes behind, and I'll keep my distance. He left a note for Margie Hutchins, who was sleeping in the guest room, and drove toward Gresham. His phone showed McCarthy's car pulling into the secure store facility. Timothy parked 2 blocks away and waited. At 3:05 a.m., McCarthy's car left the facility, now heading toward Oregon City, toward the Meadowbrook Holdings warehouse. Timothy's pulse quickened. This was it. McCarthy was checking on his assets, probably moving or destroying evidence. The email had achieved exactly what Timothy intended: panic. He called Detective Valdez. Ralph McCarthy is heading to a warehouse in Oregon City. 3472, Industrial Drive. If you want to catch him doing something illegal, now's your chance. Valdez's voice was groggy but alert. How do you know this? Does it matter? You've got maybe 15 minutes before he's in and out. Tim, if you're there. I'm nowhere near there. A lie, but one Timothy delivered convincingly. I'm home with my son. Just passing along information I happened to receive. A pause. Then, stay home. Don't go anywhere near that location. If McCarthy is destroying evidence, we need clean observation. Any contamination. I understand. Timothy hung up and drove to within 3 blocks of the warehouse. He parked in an empty lot behind an abandoned building, giving him a sight line to the facility while remaining hidden. McCarthy's Mercedes sat outside the warehouse. Lights were on inside the building. 15 minutes later, multiple police vehicles approached without sirens, lights off. Timothy watched through binoculars as officers surrounded the building. Valdez emerged from an unmarked car, coordinating the operation. They waited. McCarthy was inside for another 20 minutes before emerging with 2 large boxes. He loaded them into his trunk and turned toward his car, and found himself facing 6 police officers with weapons drawn. Even from 3 blocks away, Timothy could see McCarthy's face go white. The arrest was clean, professional. McCarthy was handcuffed and placed in a police cruiser. Officers entered the warehouse while others searched McCarthy's vehicle. Timothy allowed himself a small smile. One down. But this was just the beginning. He drove home, arriving at 5:30 a.m. as dawn broke over Portland. Margie was in the kitchen making coffee, looking worried. Everything all right, Mr. Knight? Yes. Just had to handle some urgent business. Thank you for staying. After she left, Timothy checked news feeds on his laptop. Nothing yet. Too early for the press to have the story. But by afternoon, Ralph McCarthy's arrest would be public knowledge. And Clarence Ferguson and Everett Goldstein would know they were next. Timothy made breakfast as Devin stumbled into the kitchen, rubbing sleep from his eyes. His son looked better than he had a week ago, still haunted, still withdrawn, but healing in small increments. Morning, buddy. Pancakes. Can we have waffles instead? Waffles it is. They ate together, Devin chattering about a science project he was working on, something about volcanoes. Normal conversation. Normal morning. The kind of moment Timothy had feared they'd never have again. This was why he was doing this. Not just for revenge, though that was part of it, but to reclaim normalcy. To show his son that predators could be stopped, that justice, true justice, was possible. His phone buzzed. A text from Valdez. McCarthy's talking. Trying to cut a deal. Giving up names. Timothy replied, including Ferguson and Goldstein, and others. This is bigger than we thought. Good. Timothy deleted the text thread and focused on breakfast with his son. The next phase could wait a few hours. But by noon, Clarence Ferguson would discover that his carefully constructed life was about to collapse. And he would have no idea who was pulling the strings. Clarence Ferguson had coached Little League for 12 years. Every spring, he volunteered with the local youth baseball organization, teaching 8-year-olds how to throw curveballs and slide into second base. Parents loved him. Kids trusted him. Which, Timothy reflected, was exactly the point. He sat in his car across from Ferguson's accounting office in Beaverton, watching through tinted windows as the man arrived for work at 8:30 a.m., carrying a briefcase and a coffee cup, looking like any other suburban professional starting his day. Ferguson had no idea his business partner had been arrested 6 hours earlier. Had no idea police were currently obtaining warrants for his financial records. Had no idea that his comfortable, carefully maintained life was about to be destroyed. Timothy had spent the previous week learning everything about Clarence Ferguson. The man was meticulous, kept detailed records, followed routines, rarely deviated from patterns. He'd been married to his wife, Thelma, for 34 years. 3 children, all successful, all living out of state. A paid-off mortgage, a reasonable car, a middle-class life that screamed normalcy. But Timothy had access to Ferguson's hidden life thanks to Kayla's digital forensics. A secret offshore account, encrypted files on his work computer, communications with Gary Bauer that used coded language but were obviously coordinating something illegal. The question was how to expose Ferguson without tipping him off that someone was actively hunting the network. McCarthy's arrest would do that naturally. Ferguson would realize the walls were closing in. But Timothy wanted to accelerate his panic, force mistakes, create opportunities for the police to gather evidence. His phone buzzed. A text from Jerry Weiss. Ferguson just got a call. Looked shaken. Left his office in a hurry. Timothy started his car and followed at a distance as Ferguson's sedan pulled out of the parking lot. The accountant drove erratically, running a yellow light, cutting across lanes. Definitely panicking. Ferguson headed to a commercial storage facility in Tigard, one Timothy hadn't seen in the property records. Interesting, a private rental, not connected to Bauer McCarthy. Timothy parked and watched through binoculars as Ferguson accessed a unit on the second floor, staying inside for 15 minutes before emerging with a laptop bag and what looked like a portable hard drive. Evidence. Ferguson was collecting evidence, probably planning to destroy it before the police came knocking. Timothy called Valdez. Ferguson is at Storage Max in Tigard, Unit 2 to 47. He's removing computer equipment. How do you never mind? We can't move yet. Don't have a warrant for that location. So get one. Doesn't work that fast, Tim. We need probable cause, a judge's signature. Then I'll give you probable cause. Timothy hung up and approached the storage facility on foot. Ferguson's car was still there, the man probably cleaning out the unit. Timothy pulled out his phone and activated the voice recorder app. He walked up to Unit 2 to 47 and knocked firmly. Ferguson opened the door, face pale, eyes wide. Who are you, Mr. Ferguson? My name is Timothy Knight. My son Devin was assaulted by Gary Bauer for 3 years. I thought you might want to know that Ralph McCarthy was arrested this morning, and he's giving the police names. Lots of names. Ferguson's face went from pale to ashen. I don't know what you're talking about. Yes, you do. And the police know too. They're getting warrants right now for your home, your office, this storage unit. Everything you've built, everything you've hidden, it's all coming out. You need to leave. This is private property. I am leaving, but I wanted to look you in the eye first. Wanted to see what kind of man facilitates the abuse of children. Timothy stepped closer, his voice dropping to a deadly calm. My son was 9 years old. 9. And you helped Gary Bauer do that to him. Ferguson's hands were shaking. Behind him, Timothy could see boxes of files, computer equipment, external drives. I didn't. Save it for your lawyer. You're going to need one. Timothy turned and walked away, his phone still recording. He'd captured Ferguson's reaction, his presence at a storage unit connected to the case, his obvious knowledge of McCarthy's arrest. It wasn't enough to convict, but it was enough for probable cause. He called Valdez from his car. Ferguson is at that storage unit right now, actively moving evidence. I spoke to him, mentioned McCarthy's arrest. He's panicking. If you move now. Did you threaten him? I informed him of publicly available information, and I told him what he did to my son. A pause. Stay there. Don't approach him again. We're 20 minutes out. Timothy waited in his car, watching the storage facility entrance. Ferguson emerged 12 minutes later, arms full of boxes, loading them frantically into his car. He made 3 trips, moving with the desperate urgency of a man who knew his time was running out. On the 4th trip, police cars arrived, blocking the exit. Ferguson dropped the box he was carrying, files spilling across the pavement. He looked around wildly, saw the officers approaching, and actually ran, a 62-year-old accountant in dress shoes, running across the parking lot like he had any chance of escape. They tackled him after 50 yards. Timothy watched it all from his car, feeling nothing but cold satisfaction. 2 down, 2 to go. His phone rang. Dr. Kane. Mr. Knight, I wanted to check in before Devin's session this afternoon. How is he doing? Timothy forced his voice into something resembling normal. Better each day. Still having nightmares, but he's talking more. Opening up. That's good. And you? I know you've had to manage your own trauma while supporting him. I'm handling it. Are you? Because the school counselor mentioned you've seemed distracted when dropping Devin off. And I've seen the news about arrests related to your father-in-law's case. This must be bringing up a lot of emotions. It is, but I'm dealing with them appropriately. A knowing silence. Mr. Knight, I've worked with trauma survivors for 20 years. I can recognize when someone is channeling their pain into anger, using activity to avoid processing grief. It's a common response, but it's not sustainable. I appreciate your concern, Dr. Kane. But right now, my son needs me focused. I can process my own feelings later. Just, please be careful. Devin needs his father. Make sure you're there for him. I will be. After hanging up, Timothy sat in his car and let himself feel it. The rage, the grief, the crushing guilt that he'd missed 3 years of abuse happening to his son. That he'd trusted Gary Bauer, had let Devin spend Tuesday afternoons in that house, had never noticed the signs. Dr. Kane was right. He was channeling everything into action, into the systematic destruction of the men who'd hurt his son, because stopping meant feeling, and feeling meant drowning. But he couldn't stop yet. Not until this was finished. Timothy drove to pick up Devin from school, forcing himself into the role of normal father. They went to therapy together, Devin talking about his fears and memories while Timothy held his hand and provided reassurance. Afterward, Dr. Kane pulled Timothy aside. He's making remarkable progress. The fact that he feels safe enough to discuss his trauma is huge. Keep doing what you're doing, providing stability, consistency, support. I will. And Mr. Knight, consider talking to someone yourself. You're carrying a tremendous burden. Timothy nodded, knowing he wouldn't. Not yet. Not until Gary Bauer and everyone who'd helped him was destroyed. That evening, news broke about Clarence Ferguson's arrest. The local media ran stories about child exploitation network, police investigation expanding, more arrests expected. Everett Goldstein would be watching those reports. Would know McCarthy and Ferguson had both been arrested. Would understand that he was next. The question was what he'd do about it. Timothy pulled up surveillance footage of Goldstein's law office. The attorney had left work early, unusual for him. Jerry Weiss's team reported that Goldstein had driven to his home in Lake Oswego and hadn't emerged since. Either hiding or planning. Timothy needed to know which. He called Kayla. Can you get into Goldstein's home network? Already there. What do you need? Access to his computer. I want to know what he's doing. Give me an hour. While waiting, Timothy made dinner for Devin. Spaghetti and meatballs, comfort food. They ate together while watching a nature documentary. Devin curled against Timothy's side on the couch, gradually relaxing into the safety of routine. These moments were what mattered. Not the revenge, not the satisfaction of watching predators fall. Just this, his son, healing, trusting him again. But revenge made these moments possible. Ensured they'd continue without the shadow of Gary Bauer and his network hanging over them. After Devin went to bed, Timothy's laptop pinged. Kayla had sent access credentials to Goldstein's home computer. Timothy logged in remotely and found himself looking at a law office desktop. Goldstein was actively working, multiple windows open. Legal documents, case files, email, and one particularly interesting window, a darknet forum. Timothy's hands clenched. Goldstein was on a forum discussing relocation services, evidence disposal, and contingency planning for legal exposure. He was trying to run. Timothy screenshot everything, then sent it to Valdez with a simple message. Goldstein is planning to flee. Move now or lose him. The response came immediately. Already ahead of you. Warrant signed an hour ago. Moving on his location in 30 minutes. He'll run if he knows you're coming. He won't know. We're good at this. Timothy watched Goldstein's screen activity through the remote access. The attorney was methodical, deleting files, clearing browser history, preparing to disappear. At 10:47 p.m., Goldstein's screen suddenly changed. He'd pulled up a news feed showing live coverage of police vehicles surrounding his home. Timothy watched through the remote access as Goldstein frantically typed messages, tried to access encrypted files, attempted to wipe his hard drive. Then the screen went black. Police had breached the house. Everett Goldstein was done. 3 arrests in 2 days. The network was collapsing faster than Timothy had anticipated. McCarthy was talking, giving up details. Ferguson had been caught with evidence. Goldstein had been nabbed while actively destroying files. All that remained was finding Gary Bauer. The man who'd started it all. The man who'd hurt Devin. The man who deserved the worst of what Timothy had planned. And Timothy knew exactly where to look. Gary Bauer was hiding in plain sight. Timothy had figured it out 3 days ago, but had waited, letting the police chase dead ends while he prepared the final phase. The gas station charge in Reno had been a diversion, a card used deliberately to send investigators in the wrong direction. But Timothy knew Gary better than the police did. Knew that the old Marine wouldn't run far from familiar territory. Wouldn't abandon everything he'd built without a plan to reclaim it. The breakthrough had come from studying property records. Gary didn't just own his suburban house. He owned 4 other properties in Oregon under various LLCs. One was the warehouse in Oregon City. Another was a commercial building in Salem. The third was a rental property in Astoria. The fourth was a cabin in the Cascade Mountains, purchased through a corporation dissolved 10 years ago. The kind of property that wouldn't show up in a casual search, that required deep forensic accounting to uncover. Timothy had driven past it twice, confirming his suspicions. Fresh tire tracks in the driveway. Smoke from the chimney. Movement behind curtains. Gary was there. The question was what to do about it. Timothy could call Valdez, let the police handle the arrest. Clean, legal, appropriate. Gary would face trial, probably spend the rest of his life in prison. Justice through the system. Or Timothy could handle it himself. He'd spent 3 weeks orchestrating the destruction of Gary's network, using legal methods and illegal ones, manipulating events to ensure maximum damage to everyone involved. But Gary Bauer deserved something more personal. Timothy packed a bag, camping gear, supplies, equipment that Kayla had acquired through channels that didn't require questions. He told Margie he'd be gone for 2 days on a business trip, made arrangements for Devin's care, and drove into the mountains. The cabin sat 15 miles from the nearest town, accessed by a dirt road that turned treacherous in winter. It was early November, snow already dusting the peaks, the air sharp with cold. Timothy parked a mile away and hiked in, approaching from the tree line. Through binoculars, he confirmed Gary's presence, the old man moving past a window, looking thinner than Timothy remembered, haunted. Good. Timothy set up camp in the woods with a clear sight line to the cabin. He had food for 3 days, warm sleeping bag, equipment to monitor Gary's movements, and a plan that would ensure the old man paid for everything he'd done. The first night, Timothy just watched. Gary moved through the cabin like a ghost, barely eating, drinking heavily, pacing. The man knew his network had been destroyed, that his former associates were in custody, that his world had collapsed. But he didn't know Timothy was coming. On the second day, Timothy moved closer. He disabled the cabin's generator at 2 a.m., plunging it into darkness. Gary emerged with a flashlight, investigating, and Timothy used the opportunity to plant cameras around the property. When Gary went back inside, Timothy restored power. The old man would assume it was a mechanical failure, wouldn't suspect surveillance. Timothy retreated to his camp and reviewed footage. The cameras showed Gary drinking, crying, occasionally talking to himself. At one point, he knelt by the fireplace and seemed to pray. Timothy felt no sympathy. On the third day, he made his move. At dawn, Timothy approached the cabin directly. He knocked on the door with calm authority. Gary answered with a pistol in hand, but his arm dropped when he saw Timothy. You, me, the police, aren't here. This is just you and me. Timothy stepped inside uninvited. The cabin interior was sparse, furniture, supplies, evidence of someone living in exile. I want to know why. Gary backed away, the pistol forgotten in his hand. You don't understand. Then explain it. My son spent 3 years in your basement. Explain that. I'm sick. Gary's voice cracked. I've always been sick. I tried to fight it, tried to be normal, but you didn't. You acted on it. You hurt children. You built a network to facilitate abuse. You turned my son's life into a nightmare. Timothy's voice was deadly calm. Being sick doesn't excuse what you did. I know. I never wanted. Gary slumped into a chair, the pistol loose in his grip. After Cheryl died, when you let me spend time with Devin, I thought maybe I could be better. Thought I could just be a grandfather. But then the urges came back, and I couldn't. Stop. Timothy's hands clenched. Don't tell me you couldn't control it. You planned it. You built that room. You installed cameras. You coordinated with McCarthy and Ferguson and Goldstein. You made choices. Gary looked up, tears streaming down his face. I'm sorry. God, I'm so sorry. If I could undo it. You can't. And sorry doesn't fix what you broke. Timothy pulled out his phone, showing Gary a photo. Devin in the hospital, sedated, broken. This is what your choices did. My son wakes up screaming. He flinches when adults touch him. He's 9 years old, and he's terrified of the world. Gary buried his face in his hands, sobbing. Timothy felt nothing but cold rage. This man didn't deserve tears, didn't deserve sympathy, deserved only what Timothy had planned. Here's what's going to happen, Timothy said quietly. You're going to confess. Everything. Every child, every member of your network, every location, every detail. You're going to give the police enough evidence to dismantle everything you built. They'll kill me in prison. I know. That's the point. Timothy stepped closer. But first, you're going to tell me everything. I want to know what happened to my son. Every detail. And then you're going to write it down, sign it, and hand it over. And if I don't, Timothy pulled out his own weapon, a knife Kayla had provided, untraceable, sharp. Then I'll make sure you suffer before you die, and the police will find your body with evidence pointing to your network partners. They'll assume McCarthy or Ferguson or Goldstein ordered your death to keep you quiet. Either way, you don't leave this mountain alive, but you get to choose how hard that death is. Gary stared at the knife, at Timothy's face, and saw the truth there. Timothy Knight had come prepared to kill. What do you want to know? Gary whispered. And so Timothy made Gary talk. Made him recount every Tuesday afternoon, every moment in that soundproofed room, every violation of Devin's innocence. Timothy recorded it all on his phone, his face expressionless even as Gary described horrors that would haunt Timothy forever. When Gary finished, shaking and sick, Timothy handed him paper and a pen. Write it. Everything. Sign it. It took 4 hours. Gary filled 18 pages with meticulous detail, names, dates, locations, financial transactions, other victims. A roadmap to destroying what remained of the network. When he finished, Timothy took the confession and read it carefully. Complete. Damning. Enough to ensure convictions for everyone involved. What now? Gary asked, his voice hollow. Timothy pulled out his phone and dialed Detective Valdez. I have Gary Bauer, he said when the detective answered. Cascade Mountain Cabin, 15 miles east of Government Camp. He's unarmed and ready to surrender. And I have a full written confession. Tim, what did you do? What needed to be done? Get here before I change my mind about letting him live. Timothy hung up and sat across from Gary, the confession between them, the knife still in Timothy's hand. They sat in silence for 30 minutes, Timothy watching Gary with cold eyes, Gary trembling and broken. Finally, Gary spoke. Are you going to kill me before they arrive? Timothy considered it. Really considered it. How easy it would be to drive that knife into Gary's chest, to watch the life leave the eyes of the man who destroyed his son's childhood, to take direct and final revenge. No, he said eventually, because that would be mercy. You're going to live long enough to face trial, long enough to hear victims testify, long enough to see every detail of your crimes made public, long enough to watch everyone you ever cared about learn what you really were. Timothy leaned forward. And then you're going to prison, where the other inmates will know exactly what you did to children. And however they choose to handle that information, well, that's between you and them. Gary closed his eyes, fresh tears spilling down his weathered cheeks. Police sirens echoed through the mountains 35 minutes later. Timothy walked outside as multiple vehicles surrounded the cabin, officers emerging with weapons drawn. Valdez was among them, his face tight with anger and something else, reluctant respect. He's inside, Timothy said, handing over the knife and the confession. Unarmed, compliant, ready to surrender. Everything you need is in those papers. You could have gotten yourself killed, Valdez said. But I didn't. You could have contaminated the case, made evidence inadmissible. But I didn't. Timothy met the detective's eyes. He confessed voluntarily, wrote it all down, signed it. No coercion, no threats. Just a grandfather explaining himself to a father. Valdez studied Timothy for a long moment, then took the confession and read the first page. His face darkened. Jesus, that's just the beginning. Wait until you get to the parts about the other victims. Officers led Gary out in handcuffs. The old man looked at Timothy as they passed, but Timothy looked away. He'd seen enough of Gary Bauer. Didn't need to give him another second of attention. We'll need your statement, Valdez said. Full account of how you found him, what was said. Tomorrow. Right now. I need to get home to my son. Timothy drove down the mountain as the sun set over Oregon, his phone full of recordings, his conscience clear. He'd done what needed to be done. Devin was safe. The network was destroyed. Justice, in its way, had been served. When he got home, Devin was waiting, having convinced Margie to let him stay up. Did you find Grandpa? His son asked quietly. Yes. The police have him now. He's going to jail for the rest of his life. Devin nodded, some tension leaving his small shoulders. Good. They sat together on the couch, Devin curled against Timothy's side, and watch cartoons until the boy fell asleep. Timothy carried him to bed, tucked him in, and sat watching his son breathe in the darkness. It was over. The arrests would lead to trials. McCarthy, Ferguson, and Goldstein were already cooperating, giving up more names. The network was being dismantled piece by piece. More victims were coming forward. The full scope of what Gary and his associates had done was emerging into public view. And through it all, Timothy had ensured that every step toward justice had been pushed, prodded, and carefully orchestrated. The police thought they'd built the case. The prosecutors thought they'd gathered the evidence. But Timothy knew the truth. He'd created the conditions for their success, had applied pressure at exactly the right moments, had made the network collapse from within. Dr. Kane would probably say he was still avoiding his own trauma, still channeling grief into action. Maybe she was right. But Timothy had accomplished what he set out to do, protected his son, destroyed the monsters who'd hurt him, and ensured that Gary Bauer's legacy would be nothing but shame. That was enough. For now, that was enough. He returned to the living room and opened his laptop. The files Kayla had compiled sat in encrypted folders, evidence he couldn't give to police because it had been obtained illegally, but evidence nonetheless. Timothy copied it all to multiple drives, stored them in different locations. Insurance, in case the legal case faltered. Leverage, if anyone involved tried to escape justice. Then he deleted the original files from his laptop, wiped the browsing history, removed any trace of his extra-legal investigation. As far as anyone could prove, Timothy Knight had been a concerned father who'd cooperated with police, nothing more. His phone buzzed. A text from Dr. Kane. Saw the news about Gary Bauer's capture. How are you holding up? Timothy typed back, relieved. Ready to focus on healing. Good. Let's schedule a session for you next week. Just you, no Devin. Time to process your own experience. I'll think about it. Please do. You've been strong for your son. Now be strong for yourself. Timothy set down his phone and looked around his loft, the life he'd built, the home he'd created, the safety he'd established for Devin. Tomorrow would bring more challenges. Devin's therapy would continue. The trials would unfold. Media attention would be intrusive. The healing process would be long and difficult. But tonight, for the first time in weeks, Timothy Knight allowed himself to feel something other than rage. He felt hope. And in the bedroom down the hall, his son slept peacefully, finally safe, finally free. That was justice enough. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.